The night was quiet, too quiet for Lee Min-ho's restless soul. His phone lay in his hand, screen glowing with a name that carried more weight than any role he had ever played, more meaning than any red carpet spotlight could ever give him. Song Hye-kyo. He pressed the call button, his heartbeat echoing like a drumline against the silence. The world seemed to pause. Each ring on the other end felt like a countdown to an explosion, one that could shatter the walls he had built around himself. But as the seconds dragged on, there was no soft hello, no familiar warmth in her voice, no answer at all. The call went unanswered. And in that silence, an entire story began to unfold. Lee Min-ho leaned back, staring at the city lights from his high-rise apartment. He had spoken to millions of fans, given interviews to countless journalists, but somehow, his voice had failed him when it came to one person. It wasn't just a call. It was his last attempt to bridge a gap that had been growing wider with every passing day. And yet, on the other side of the city, Song Hye-kyo sat in her dimly lit living room, staring at her phone as his name flashed on the screen. Her hands trembled, but she didn't answer. Why? Because sometimes love hurts more when it is real. She placed the phone face down on the table, closing her eyes as if shutting out the world could silence the storm inside her chest. Memories of their late-night conversations replayed in her mind. His laughter when she teased him, the quiet comfort of his voice when he spoke about his dreams, and that one time when he had whispered, almost without meaning to, "You make the world less heavy." How could she answer, knowing that if she heard him again, her carefully built walls would crumble? And so, Song Hye-kyo did something that would break not only his heart but also her own. She walked away from the call. The next morning, Lee Min-ho woke to sunlight that felt colder than usual. His phone still showed the last outgoing call. No missed call back. No message. Just silence. He stared at the screen as if the weight of that unanswered call carried every truth he had been afraid to face. But Song Hye-kyo, too, carried her own torment. She went about her day with a smile that fooled the cameras but not her heart. During a brand shoot, her stylist commented on how radiant she looked, but behind that glow was a storm brewing, one that no makeup could conceal. After the cameras were off and the applause faded, she sat alone in the dressing room. Her phone buzzed with messages from friends, but not from him. The silence between them had turned into a wall, higher than either of them imagined. A week passed. Then another. Lee Min-ho thought of dialing again countless times but stopped each time. Pride, fear, uncertainty, they strangled him like vines. But one night, after too many restless hours, he found himself standing in front of the restaurant where they had shared their first quiet dinner together. The memory was vivid. She had laughed so freely that evening, her eyes sparkling brighter than the city lights. He had told himself that if he ever lost that laughter, it would be the greatest loss of his life. And now, staring at the empty seat across the table, he realized he already had. What Song Hye-kyo did next would be the turning point neither of them expected. After weeks of silence, she found herself flipping through an old notebook. In it were fragments of poems, scribbles of thoughts she had once written during their happiest days. One line stood out to her. Love doesn't end when words are left unsaid. It ends when hearts stop trying. Her hands shook as she read it, the truth crashing over her. She hadn't answered his call not because she didn't care, but because she cared too much. She was afraid of falling deeper, of letting herself be vulnerable again, of repeating heartbreak she had once sworn she would never endure. But in her silence, she had already broken both of their hearts. That night, she took a step she never thought she would. She wrote him a letter. No cameras, no flashing lights, no words polished for the public eye. Just raw honesty on paper. She wrote about the unanswered call, about the fear that had silenced her, about how every second of not answering felt like cutting a piece of herself away. She sealed the envelope, hesitating before placing it in a small box along with a memento only he would understand, a tiny pressed flower from the park where they once walked together in secret. And then, instead of mailing it, she left it at his doorstep. No note, no signature, just silence and truth bound together. When Lee Min-ho returned home that evening, he found the box. At first, he thought it was fan mail, something common in his life. But the handwriting on the envelope, the delicate neatness of her strokes, was something he recognized instantly. His hands trembled as he opened it. With every word, his breath caught. His eyes burning with tears he hadn't allowed himself to shed. It wasn't just an apology. It was her heart laid bare. And in that moment, Lee Min-ho understood what the unanswered call had truly meant. Not rejection but fear. Not distance but fragility. Not the end but a pause. What Song Hye-kyo did broke his heart, but not in the way one expects. It broke it open, wide enough to let her back in, wide enough to hold the weight of two fragile souls who had been too scared to answer each other before. The unanswered call was no longer just silence. It was a story of love paused, fear confronted, and hearts daring to beat again despite the pain. And though the world may never know the exact words exchanged when they finally spoke again, one thing was certain. When love is real, even silence speaks louder than 1,000 words. This wasn't just about a missed call. It was about the things we leave unsaid, the moments we let slip away, and the choices we make when fear feels louder than love. Lee Min-ho's unanswered call was a chapter of heartbreak, but Song Hye-kyo's next move turned it into a story of courage. A story that reminds us all that sometimes, what breaks our hearts is also what teaches us how to love again. The box sat on Lee Min-ho's desk like a fragile secret. Hours had passed since he opened it, but the weight of Song Hye-kyo's words still clung to him. Every line in her letter was etched into his mind, burning deeper with each replay. It was not just ink on paper, it was her heart raw and trembling. And yet, as the night stretched on, he realized something. An unanswered call was never truly silent. It carried echoes, questions, and a kind of ache that forced two people to confront what they had been too afraid to face. The world saw them as stars, but behind the bright lights, they were just two fragile souls standing at the edge of a cliff called, What If? Lee Min-ho found himself wandering to the balcony, clutching the letter as if it were a lifeline. The city stretched below him, endless, loud, alive. But in that moment, all he could hear was the memory of her laughter. He closed his eyes, picturing her the night they had walked along the Han River. She had tugged at his sleeve like a child, pointing out paper lanterns floating in the water. "I wish time could stop right here," she had whispered. Now, he wondered if she had felt that same wish when his call lit up her phone and she chose silence instead of hello. On the other side of Seoul, Song Hye-kyo sat by her window, watching raindrops chase each other down the glass. The world thought she was unshakable, the graceful queen of the screen. But if anyone could see her then, they would have seen a woman torn between longing and fear. She reached for her phone instinctively, thumb hovering over his name. A single tap could undo the distance, erase the silence. But what if his voice carried disappointment? What if she heard pain she couldn't heal? Instead, she set the phone down, pressing her forehead against the cool window. In her heart, she whispered words she couldn't say aloud. "I wanted to answer. I wanted to run to you. But I was afraid of what I might lose if I did." The universe, however, has a way of pulling hearts back into the same orbit. Weeks later, at a charity gala, fate placed them under the same roof once again. Cameras flashed, reporters whispered, but the real tension unfolded behind the smiles. Lee Min-ho spotted her across the hall, radiant in a flowing ivory gown, surrounded by admirers. Yet even in the crowd she looked alone. Their eyes met for a fleeting second. It wasn't the first time they had seen each other in public, but tonight felt different. Tonight, their silence screamed louder than the applause. He wanted to walk up to her, to break the walls with a single word. But before he could move, someone called his name, pulling him into a conversation he didn't care about. By the time he looked back, she was gone. Song Hye-kyo had slipped into the garden outside, away from the noise, away from the cameras. The night air was cool, carrying the scent of roses. She closed her eyes, taking a deep breath, when suddenly she heard footsteps behind her. Running away again. Her heart stopped. She turned, and there he was, Not Lee Min-ho the superstar, not the man worshipped by millions, but the man whose voice had once felt like home. She tried to smile, but it faltered. Some things are easier to avoid than to face. His eyes softened, though his voice was steady. And some things hurt more when you run from them. For a moment, the world held its breath. The silence between them was no longer an enemy but a fragile bridge. He took a step closer. Do you know what that unanswered call did to me? It wasn't just about hearing your voice. It was about knowing if I still mattered. Her lips parted, her eyes glistening. I wanted to answer. I was afraid. Afraid of what it would mean if I let you back in. His voice broke into a whisper. And did walking away hurt less? Her tears betrayed her. No. It hurt more. The confession hung in the air, raw and unpolished. For the first time in weeks, their hearts beat in the same rhythm again. The garden became their sanctuary that night. They spoke not as celebrities but as two people tangled in the messy truth of love. She admitted how she had written the letter with shaking hands, terrified he would hate her for her silence. He confessed how he had read it 100 times, finding in her words not rejection but the same fear he carried. Love isn't about being fearless, he told her gently. It's about being scared, and still choosing to stay. Her hand trembled as he reached for it, but when their fingers intertwined, it was as if the unanswered call had finally found its voice. That night didn't end with fireworks or grand declarations. It ended quietly, with two souls deciding to stop running. When they parted, she whispered, "Next time you call, I'll answer." And for the first time in a long while, Lee Min-ho smiled. Not the smile for cameras, but the smile of a man whose heart had just been mended. The world may never know what happened in that garden. To the public, they were just two stars at a gala, exchanging polite smiles and parting ways. But for them, it was the night's silence transformed into courage. The unanswered call had broken them, yes. But what Song Hye-kyo did next, writing, confessing, finally staying, pieced them back together in a way that was far stronger than before. Because sometimes, the most heartbreaking silence is the one that leads us back to the only voice we were meant to hear.